Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello, and welcome to the Sport Business Podcast. I'm Martin Ross, Editor-in-Chief at Sport Business News. You're back or joining for the first time. Either way, you're certainly in for a treat. We'll be picking apart some of the industry's big stories, going deep on our football media rights deals with lessons for the wider market, and as always, reviewing the trends shaping the sports industry. I'm joined by John Rest, Chief Correspondent. Hello, John.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
I'm all good. What have we got this week? So the newsroom, we're going to feature the Bundesliga's lengthy and often controversial search for external funding that has led us to Adidas providing a €100 million facility loan and also extending its ball supply deal at the same time. Plus, we'll look at IMG being back in media rights business with World Rugby. Inside the deal, we'll look at the Norwegian elite Syrian's 10% uplift in its new domestic broadcast deals in a bear market. Not that kind of bear market, although I did check there are Eurasian brown bears near the Russian-Norwegian border, John, so there you go.
Thank you.
Maria Kholodova will be breaking down the what, but more importantly, the why, plus the usual insights and tidbits in any other business. John, to kick things off, I'm going to go political, which is unlike me and unlike this podcast, but don't worry. Did you hear about the seismic Iranian victory over Trump at the start of this week?
Yes, Martin. Very clever.
Do you like it?
The reason I know that you're talking about the Snooker World Championship is because I've got a little flutter on Mark Allen, and he's got to the semi-final, and he may well be playing an Iranian in that semi-final. So that's why
I hope he's not playing his ex-partner. That was...
Oh, yeah, that was an interesting
that was quite the matchup. Yes, you're right. It's Hossein Vafai, who we mentioned on a previous podcast, who complained about the Crucible being smelly. The current Crucible, not the nice new one that we're getting. Yeah, he shocked Judd Trump 13-12, which was a big upset. So, yeah, quite the victory for Iran. They've been waving Hossein Vafai flags and tifos all the way down the Strait of Hormuz ever since. But a big win. I enjoyed it. I've actually got into the snooker a lot earlier this year, partly because the football results up here did not go in my favour on Sunday. So I thought I would like to watch something very neutral that I'm not going to get upset by and I can just enjoy. And that's been the snooker for me. And actually picked up on a bit of a kind of sponsorship trend, or they've started to, I don't know if you've noticed this. I mentioned this, I suppose, about the qualifiers, but it's almost like the footballization of snooker sponsorship, the tableside LED. So last year they introduced these big LED boards behind the table, which obviously they use when the players come on and the names and so on. It looks really good. But also they now have a kind of black back digital LED, and it's 4 logos now this year. And they're all kind of given equal footing there. So it means your title sponsor, who's Halo, sits alongside Midnight, Pension Bee, and Victorian Plumbing.
Oh, nice.
So they've gone
we all need some of that.
Well, we do. So we now have 4 logos sort of all alongside the side of the table. Last year, it was just 3. And it's kind of gone are the days, we're similar age of kind of, Embassy World Championships or Betfred or 888, when the title sponsor, the naming rights sponsor, got, basically all the inventory. So if you watched it, you could only see that logo. And it's really changing now. 2024 was the last Kazoo deal. They'd Riyadh season as well. And the year before that, it was just Kazoo and I think WST TV, which is obviously the Matchroom kind of and World Snooker's OTT portal. So it's really changing before our eyes. Well, before our geeky eyes, anybody willing to watch it with that much detail.
You get quite a lot of time, don't you, on snooker as a brand? Because, I was watching a game the other day, it was almost 2 minutes before a guy played a shot because he was snookered. So you do get quite a lot of timing and brand recognition, whereas other sports, it moves so quickly. So
depending how it's produced, yeah, because a lot of it is just a still shot over the table when you're not seeing any brands apart from, I think it's Strachan Tables. If you look underneath, it says Strachan Tables. So it's only it's the side shots, maybe when they're thinking about the shot, or at the start of the frame is a good one. Could you see it all the way along? I suppose it just depends how Sunset and Vine now do that, so how it's being produced. So that was possibly the most niche start ever to one of our podcasts. Not the most heavyweight commercial development, but interesting nonetheless. But we are going to jump from one theatre to dramatic goings-on in the newsroom this week, John. I don't know if they're that dramatic. If they weren't dramatic, then that segue doesn't work. John, German football, external investment is a topic that has rumbled on for 5 or 6 years. It came to a bit of a head this week with the Adidas news, and we've also got a good idea of the direction things will be going. Can you tell us all about that?
Yeah, I guess to start with a little bit of I'm going to get you're very good at German, Martin, so I wonder if you'll understand this. We have to give a Hut ab to SportBild.
That's a tip of the hat.
A tip of the hat to SportBild.
Yeah, a chapeau in French, chapeau.
They'd actually kind of got some reporting of this almost a year ago that Adidas and the German Bundesliga, the DFL, were talking about potentially some kind of investment. And yeah, it came to light this week. Adidas has provided a 100 million euro loan to the Bundesliga. There's some terms in that. I think a maximum of 20 million can be called upon per year. This still has to be cleared by the 36 clubs. It's important to note this is kind of the Bundesliga's executive committee have agreed this. It's, I think, a 1.5% interest loan, so it's really low, interest they're paying on it. And essentially, it's built into a wider commercial partnership that Adidas has with the Bundesliga, which hasn't actually begun yet. They will be providing the match balls from the 26-27 season. I think that was a 4-year deal. That's now actually been extended to an 8-year deal already. So it's kind of built into that as a revenue stream as well. But it's not just, I think there's a wider story. This is not just an loan or an investment into the league. I think, as you mentioned, this is something that we've been covering for, almost 5 years, of the search that the Bundesliga has had to basically pump money into the league. They need this. They do well on their domestic media rights. We talked about that before, but everyone struggles to get anywhere near the Premier League. How can you bridge that gap? Branding, international marketing. They need some financial help for that, and they've gone down this route.
So it's a facility loan and a very low interest, but that will allow the Bundesliga to invest, and will maybe come to sort of what they're going to invest in due course. But that was my understanding of it. And sad times for Derby Star. We did like a Derby Star match ball. I mean, the German fans, you can maybe sort of unravel the kind of private equity search a bit. I mean, if you have football fans to win a prize for moral rectitude, I think it would have to be the Bundesliga fans. It's quite unbelievable. Maybe first take us through that whole search for private equity, why it was controversial, but why the Adidas deal will avoid such repercussions this time.
Yeah, so this is the 4th attempt in 5 years that the DFL have attempted to get external finance. And 2021 was the first effort. The clubs voted themselves to end talks. Then it really kicked off again about 3 years ago, late May 2023. The league actually halted talks with private equity firms after, I think, 20 of the 36 clubs in the top 2 voted in favour. There were, too many against. There wasn't the 2/3 majority needed. At that point, they were looking to sell around about 12.5% in a new kind of media rights entity, if you like. So that died a death. Attempt number 3 came later in 2023, when 24 of the 36 clubs voted to enter what was called a strategic marketing partnership, essentially, quite cleverly worded. Although, as you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, everything's strategic now in sports business. So just a marketing partnership is suffice. But that was the bare minimum that they had, 24 out of 36 clubs. That was the furthest they kind of got this process. They had 5 firms in the running, big private equity firms, CVC, Blackstone, Bridgepoint were there as well. Eventually ended up as a bit of a battle between CVC and Blackstone. The plan there was, I think, an 8% share in a new commercial vehicle, and that would have cost around about €1 billion. So that's the number that the DFL have been looking for, and that's worth kind of remembering. And then I think it's quite well known, Blackstone pulled out of the bidding, mainly because of the complete backlash of the fans. I was actually at Cologne Werder Bremen game in February 2024.
Was that the Cologne Stadium?
It was, yeah, fantastic little
cracker,
stadium.
Isn't it?
Beauty, yeah, right in the forest. Yeah, great stadium that. And it's a Friday night game, and after, I think, 2 minutes into the second half, the game was stopped. Black tennis balls were on the pitch. There were remote control vehicles driving around. There was smoke bombs and everything. And this was all the fans protesting against private equity. So, CVC were the only company left in the running, but at the time, the DFL just kind of canned that process altogether, and normality prevailed in the league. And then since then, they've kind of had to adopt a new approach. I've spoken to both the co-CEOs of the Bundesliga at various events. They've been kind of quite open about the fact that, yes, they couldn't go down this route, but they needed some kind of financing. And they've been looking for that for the last kind of 2 years, really, since that process died. How are they going to get some kind of external financing, which has led us to where we are this week?
So why, I mean, I can guess why Adidas is different, being a sort of big German company, but could there be other German companies coming on board, and does that pass the sniff test for the German fans?
Yeah, I think it does. I think this, super important to note, this is a major German international brand. It already has huge links to German football through, kitting out the national team for 70 odd years, has a somewhat controversial 8.5% stake in Bayern Munich, and it kits out numerous of Bundesliga 1 and 2 teams. So that helps for a start. It's not buying equity. It's not getting a seat on the board. That was the big concern when, a CVC or a Blackstone were coming in, or a Bridgepoint as well. Who are these financiers coming in, getting a seat? Can they decide where we play our games, what time we play our games, what we're selling off? There's none of that with Adidas. It is, as you say, a loan repayable at kind of kind rates to the league. My understanding is that this is the first of hopefully many more similar deals. I think someone I spoke to called it kind of a blueprint. It may well be that they are talking to other major German institutions, whether that's kind of in the financial sector or elsewhere, about doing similar deals, again, in that kind of loan facility. Now, if you think they've done 100 million euros, they were very open about the fact they needed €1 billion. That 2 years ago, they still need that money. That hasn't changed. So there's still quite a big shortfall that they need to make up. And I think they're going to be doing that through these type of deals that they believe can appease the fans more, to say you're not selling off anything, which I think is really important, especially with the nuances of German football, the club ownership, the 50+1 rule. They are, have to be protected at all costs, as we've seen. Otherwise, the matches will be disrupted.
Where's the 100 million going? That's a lot of Bundesliga breakfasts in Monte Carlo. Imagine it's going elsewhere.
Well, I don't know. Actually, Monte Carlo's expensive.
It's a very good breakfast already, incidentally.
Okay. To be fair to the DFL, they've already actually been spending on international brand building using the money that they were hoping to use from the CVC deal. If you look at, for example, the Bundesliga Pass, the direct-to-consumer product that they've had, which has been in a few markets, I think started in India, Vietnam, South Africa. We did a story earlier on in the year that it's going to a couple of more countries in Africa, I think Kenya and Nigeria. So they've been, spending on that, going direct to consumer, more content, more localized content as well, which has been important. And actually the deal they did with Relevant, which is a massive, I think 15, 17 year partnership, which they did about 18 months ago across the Americas, that involves Relevant partnering with Bundesliga International on new rights deals, sponsors, content, but there's also plans for events as well on the ground. That was partly a deal that was done because they needed a partner in a key market, a key strategic market. They couldn't do it on their own because they didn't have the CVC money. So they've done a couple of things already there that they would have done anyway if they had that money. I think the Adidas money and other deals they might get, I think you're going to see kind of Bundesliga branded pre-season tournaments, essentially. You've seen the Premier League do that with their summer series in the US. Last year, the DFL did a deal with the Queensland Tourism Authority to bring Bundesliga teams to Queensland, games, training academies, that kind of thing. I think you're going to see games there. The problem has often been, if you speak to anyone, particularly Bayern and Borussia, that they are the only ones that are trying to grow the Bundesliga brand abroad. It's easy in Bayern's sense, right? I mean, they could sell out a city anywhere in the world, much more difficult for other clubs. And it's a cost to go on these tours if you're not necessarily going to get the return from your sponsors or, just generating new revenue. So I think this will be used to maybe kind of level up a little bit. Some of the smaller clubs in the Bundesliga grow their brand and just kind of be a bit more of a central fund pot. And then that's the off the pitch stuff. People obviously seem to be saying they're also looking at, from a player development, talent identification point of view, they're looking at what the Premier League have done with the under 23 Premier League, getting players ready for first team football, or throughout the football pyramid, they're going to do that at an under 21 level. So I think there's a little bit of kind of on the pitch spending as well, but a lot of it will be marketing the league and trying to close the gap with the Premier League.
There's a bit of work to be done up here. I mean, Celtic played Borussia Mönchengladbach a few years ago in Europe, and there was a wonderful picture of a pub that had written on the chalkboard outside to advertise the match, Celtic versus Borussia Mönch, and they kind of scored out that bit and then put Celtic versus Borussia Mönchen and then sort of scored that bit out because they couldn't spell it. And then they just put Celtic versus some German team. And then Borussia Mönchengladbach, as good as the socials of German clubs are in English as well, picked this up and renamed themselves some German team for a while on socials. So
excellent. There we are.
Yeah, we can't spell some of the harder names. Just finally, or endlich, as they say in Germany, why is Adidas doing it?
Well, I think the big story that happened a couple of years ago, and actually I think some people have possibly forgotten, many football fans may not even know that this World Cup is going to be the end of Adidas's relationship with the national team. 70 years. I mean, they're just two brands that are just intrinsically linked, aren't they? And that's not going to be the case from, well, the next kind of qualifiers that Germany take part in. They will be wearing Nike kit. Nike totally blew Adidas out of the water with that contract a couple of years ago, big commitment to grassroots football throughout Germany. From my understanding is when they lost that contract, talks between the Bundesliga and Adidas really accelerated. I think the Bundesliga saw an opportunity to keep Adidas kind of involved in the fabric of German football. And, likewise, Adidas have got strong connections anyway and wanted to keep involved in the game at the highest level. And they're able to do that in a different way through, supporting the growth of the 36 top tier clubs. So I think for Adidas, it was an opportunity to, they had a budget as well, bearing in mind that how much they're saving not paying the German FA. And it keeps them kind of involved at the highest echelon. So I think for them, it was a perfect timing.
Yeah, John, I mean, that relationship, John, goes so far back. 1954 was the kind of big moment, the kind of start of sports marketing. When West Germany beat Hungary in the final of the 1954 World Cup, the rain was, I think, a really torrential rain, and Adidas actually produced an extra long stud on the boots of the German team. And that's, people say, is one of the big reasons West Germany won that match against the favourites that were the Hungarians, because they had Adidas performing some boot magic. But there you go. I wanted to quickly, I don't want this to be football dominated entirely, but just quickly mention Serie A is back on CCTV, which to loose listeners of the pod is China Central Television and not closed circuit television. Yes, this is a kind of key element for any of the big leagues that a lot of them have different approaches. We reported on it earlier this week. There'll be 2 matches a week have started on CCTV5, the sports channel, 5+, and online as well. For the rest of this season, could be a precursor to a longer deal. Watch this space. They already have a big deal with Migu for sort of most of the broadcasting, but it's interesting to me the different ways leagues go about this. Premier League, the big office there. German League would maybe sort of do a big cooperation with China Media Group and sort of go down the political route sometimes. But yeah, Serie A seems to have pulled a bit of a rabbit out of a hat with this one. Took everybody by surprise. They haven't had CCTV coverage of late, which obviously clubs wouldn't be too happy with from an exposure point of view. So that was noteworthy to me. But the bigger news today, actually, is that IMG and World Rugby are back together. Well, I say back together. Was were they ever apart? I hear you ask. It takes a bit of untangling this, but it's a media rights agreement. They've announced a strategic advisory on US and global media rights, distribution, content, and sort of in-market initiatives in the lead up to the Rugby World Cups, with a big eye on the Men's Rugby World Cup and the Women's, and in 31 and 33 in the States, broader consulting and the usual kind of IMG stuff that they can do to help drive audience. But we will be doing today actually a big interview with Adam Kelly, with Sam Stitcher, and with Alan Gilpin. So look for the links in the notes. We'll put that in there for a deeper read on this. But a sort of initial reaction would be that relationship has changed so much that if you go back even 5 years, you were at a time when sort of World Rugby had historically sold its rights together with IMG, very close ties with the agency, which was doing, IMG was doing sponsorship, doing licensing, all the rest of it. The specifics of the agreement in 2019 in Japan, global rights deals were signed by Rugby World Cup Limited, a subsidiary of World Rugby, but was advised on the sales by IMG. So IMG basically negotiated the deals, but then they were signed off. It changed in 2023. IMG is reappointed for sort of all this commercial partner role, sponsorship, sales, licensing, merch, but then also selling media rights, but with the exception of 10 major markets. So that's when the relationship changed, and we started to get noises that World Rugby was looking to in-house, almost fully in-house the rights, actually, tallied with its sort of broader plan to build up an event structure and change the model. Those 10 markets, because I know you're going to ask me.
I was going to ask. I think you're going to quiz me on them.
Well, England and Scotland is treated as one. Wales is treated as another. I imagine that's due to sort of Welsh language rights. Ireland, France, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Japan, and a powerhouse of rugby. You'll never guess this one, actually. It's a bit odd.
Brazil.
It's Germany, believe it or not.
Oh, yes, I did know that, actually, yes.
Which is slightly odd, but...
There's a theme to this week's pod.
Yes, very much so.
Those 10 markets, as you've named the Big 10, I mean, how much, if we're talking men's Rugby World Cup only, how much are the global media rights worth? What are they working with here?
So 2023 Rugby World Cup did a Sport Business Media feature around the time of the tournament. They jumped by nearly 50%, 40% up on 2019, largely due to the time difference. If you think about UK, France, Sub-Saharan Africa, big deals, good market, time difference-wise. We reported that the global media rights revenue was going to be just shy of £200 million, but it depended on exchange rates. So World Rugby books its revenue in pounds, but the deals are often negotiated and completed in US dollars or euros. So there's fluctuation there. I had a look at the accounts, as I do. 2023, £189 million for broadcast rights revenue in 2023 for World Rugby, 136 million for sponsorship, but the 153 million for a tournament fee. Now, that's the old model that they adopted where the host would pay a tournament fee. So France was the last one to do that. And in return, you get to sell tickets and you get to sell domestic sponsorship. There's also a big old licensing program. It's that kind of event model that is changing. And I don't have any reason to believe it's not going to change on the back of this deal because it's only media that's mentioned. Yeah, World Rugby still has been in the process of building up its own team to centralize, to encompass, sponsorship, ticketing, hospitality, licensing. It's called Events Co. And that, as I say, that sort of rips up the previous model, host contract model, where you pay the host nation. But let's see, I'll speak to them and see what they have to say. But to me, as an initial reaction, it would seem to me a slight kind of back down from 4 or 5 years ago when Richard Heselgreave, Ben Slack at the time, who were both there at the time, no longer, talking about, let's bring all the media rights in-house, etc. So, yes, a deal just announced today and one to dissect and have a good look at for our listeners and our readers.
Yeah, I think the US stuff is interesting, isn't it, with World Rugby? They've tried before to have a World Cup there, and they now do. They've got a decent deal in place, haven't they, with I think CBS and Paramount Plus have signed up to show the next couple of editions. But can you really make that big jump to make that a sport that I think the participation's pretty good? They've got Major League Rugby going on out there, but really it's such a tough market, isn't it, to kind of break into. How they do that will be interesting to see. Okay, that's enough from the newsroom. We'll be back shortly when we go inside the deal with Norwegian football.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
We've been joined by Maria Kholodova. Maria, hello.
Hello.
You are going to break down the Norwegian Elite Syrian broadcast deals, but first of all, you want to give us your reaction to a different kind of football.
Yeah, well, I'm not shocked that we have not yet discussed the NFL draft on this podcast. We are not, as a unit, I think, massive NFL people necessarily, although I think John is.
John just likes the merch.
Yeah,
just
likes the hats.
Yeah, I do. I like the hats. But
Yeah.
no, I like the team. I didn't watch the draft though. I couldn't stay awake until whatever time in the morning to see names reeled off a list. But
To be fair, I didn't watch either, but I wanted to give
Okay.
a shout out to Fernando Mendoza, the number 1 overall pick, who was drafted from Indiana, but he was at Cal before he was at Indiana. And I covered him back when I was at Cal. So it's just really cool to see like a player that I covered and watched, a few years ago. He selected number 1 overall. So that was really cool. And another ex-Cal player, Jack Endries, tight end at Cal and then transferred to Texas and just got drafted by my team, the Bengals, in the 7th round, which I am thrilled about. So just wanted to give a shout out to a couple of ex-Cal folks. And then we got some Cal players drafted as well. Ezekiel Mass was drafted in the 5th round. So we're continue to be DBU. So I'm very excited about that. So that's my little obligatory Cal update for the podcast.
Excellent. Yeah, legally we had to do that. But I'm going to switch it back to Europe forthwith. And Norway, listeners may not know that Maria's been asking a spate of quiz questions, the answers to which everyone is Norway. So I'm going to hit you back with a quiz question that came up in the pod earlier. It sounds like a cracker joke. Where is the only place in Norway you would find bears? It's not a joke, actually.
Fjords?
No, it's along the Norwegian-Russian border. There are Eurasian bears. Anyway, the reason that came up is because of these deals being done by the elite Syrian in a bear market, you see. That was the link. We're going to have a deep dive into them. People might not even know, I suppose, elite Syrian has been around as a name for about 10 years. It was the Tippeligaen before that, which was a nod to Norsk Tipping, the betting operator. So for John and myself growing up, it was always the Tippeligaen. But now the elite Syrian, Norwegian football's been on a bit of a high with Bodo Glimt's appearances and success in the Champions League, women's performances at the Euros, and the men's team back at the World Cup for the first time since '98, like all good football teams. Maria, tell us about these deals. 10% increase was the headline. That's what's piqued our interest. 10% now feels like 50% 5 years ago. Tell us who's in and who's out, maybe first of all.
Yeah, so actually, just to correct you a little bit, it's not just the elite Syrian deal. It's a whole host of Norwegian football domestic properties, including women and the youth teams and kind of everything in between. So TV2 retain the elite Syrian, the men's top tier league, and they'll also show the top Syrian, which is the women's top tier league, and they'll also show the women's national team. And so that's kind of the biggest package in these new deals. And then Media, which is kind of a big media company publishing house, they will start showing the second tier Norwegian league from 2027. So 2 years earlier, the rest of the deals go from 29 to 2034, which is the new cycle. And Media will also have the second tier women's league and the third and fourth tier men's league. So we're really going all the way down to the bottom here. And then Schibsted, also kind of a media company publishing house from Norway, they will enter these deals for the first time. They'll be showing the men's and women's national cups, age group international matches, and the under 21 men's national team. So that's kind of the spread. TV2, as I said, they have the biggest package. Some sources have suggested that it's, it makes sense. It's way over 50%. It's the elite Syrian is the most expensive part of that whole package. And then Media second with that second tier league, and then Schibsted in third with the smallest package.
The good thing about, well, bad thing actually from a sport business media point of view is that the Norwegians are so transparent that they gave the numbers. So you didn't have to go diving, but you still had to kind of call your contacts and find out the breakdown. How much has been paid? And then I want to ask you, how has this been achieved? Because we speak to sports properties across Europe in particular, and domestic football leagues are struggling to get any kind of increase. Anything is a win, and this is very much not flat. How's it been achieved?
Yeah, so the money, yes, show me the money. So the Norwegian properties as a whole, so that whole big deal that I just rattled off, that is worth 820 million Norwegian krona per season, which is about 75 million euro or 88 million US dollars, which is big. And it's a 10% increase, as we've said. So the previous deal was worth around 750 Norwegian krona. So that's pretty sizable. And the current deal right now that goes from 2023 to 2028, that was nearly double on the previous deal. So, everything's been growing for a while, and now they're just kind of solidifying their position in the market, solidifying their growth. And how it happened, it's interesting. I think it's part skill, part luck. I think the stars did kind of align in the market for these negotiations for them. Competition in the market has been difficult. Viaplay have been pulling back. They used to be kind of everywhere, paying all sorts of money for everything. Now they've kind of had to readjust because there was quite a bit of loss there going on. So now they've kind of stuck with a high cost, high reward policy, I suppose. So they have the Premier League, they have the Champions League in Sweden, they have Conference League, Europa League in Norway. And, NRK, the public broadcaster, also kind of pulling back, not really interested in those Norwegian domestic rights. So, it was tough to find, from what I've heard, it's tough to find a lot of buyers, a lot of competition that were interested. But, the fact that there's three kind of big media companies who all got a piece of the pie for these domestic rights is quite interesting. And it's quite a big success, I think. because you not only get a lot of exposure through all these different newspapers and companies and off-pitch content, you also get good split. There's women's football, there's youth football, there's the top leagues, there's the third and fourth leagues. There's a lot going on. And I think that actually is part of the reason why they managed to get such a sizable increase, is that kind of aspect of collective bargaining. It wasn't just the third tier league going off to find a new media rights deal. It was kind of everybody together in a much more kind of consolidated, planned process than the current deal was negotiated under. So it's the exact same packages and exact same sort of inventory that was available as for this current deal, but kind of with a bit more forethought, I guess, which means that they had a negotiating committee with representatives from all the different kind of governing bodies that kind of all went into it together and did those negotiations together, which I think helps them a lot. Because, if you think about it, let's say if the women's top league was going into negotiations by itself, it probably wouldn't have gotten an increase. It wouldn't have gotten that much, especially from the current Norwegian market. That was kind of the only way to really do it, is to really combine everything.
I mean, there's some other timing elements that are curious to me as well. A couple of big tenders coming down the line. And then also the timing of Viaplay obviously cutting their cloth, NRK maybe not in it as much as you would expect, but Schibsted's takeover of TV4, which was owned by Telia, which itself was a big spender in the market. Discovery was previously a big spender in the market, come back, but they've timed it right in terms of Schibsted getting involved and also those tenders that I suppose will be coming.
So that's the other thing that I think was really important in this deal and in these negotiations, because the new cycle doesn't start until 2029. That's, over 3 years from when they launched the tender in February until the 2029 season starts in March. And the reason they went so early is because they wanted to time it with the launch of the mass sales process for UEFA men's club competitions, which launched in over 30 territories, including Norway, in beginning of March, I think. And with the Premier League rights coming to market, kind of, we think, second half of this year. And, when there isn't any competition, you're trying to make some. You're trying to create this dynamic, this competitive kind of environment where kind of broadcasters are looking and thinking, oh, we need to get something. We need to come out of this with something. And, so they kind of really play their cards right there, I think. And, as you mentioned, Martin, and as I said earlier, Viaplay is obviously a big player when it comes to Premier League, when it comes to UEFA club competition rights. And they're not necessarily going to be looking at something like this. But it still kind of creates that little tension that, is enough to create an uplift or create some sort of conversations around that might not have happened if they had waited until after the Premier League was done, for example.
I think what's interesting about this deal, isn't it, is the openness of the partnership between TV2 and media. I mean, they came out, didn't they, a couple of weeks ago saying, essentially, I don't think they literally spelled it out, but it didn't take a genius to work out that they'd bid together for the rights. And actually out of this deal, even though it doesn't start till 29, there's a slight change, right, in some of the rights in the current cycle that TV2 are handing to a media. Firstly, if you could just touch on that, but also I wonder, open up more broadly, whether we see this as a kind of a blueprint for other leagues, whether partnership is better than competition.
Yeah, so I think it's just the second tier league that is starting 2 years earlier in 27 on iMedia. And then everything else, I think, starts from 2029. And in terms of collaboration, I think it really depends on the situation. I think the reason that it was able to work so well is because iMedia is kind of a smaller player. They're, as I said, more in publishing. They have a whole host of newspapers in the country. And I think that kind of enables them to partner with a big broadcaster like TV2. And likewise for TV2, they're kind of looking for something that a media can provide that they don't have, which is access to local press and access to a lot of different kinds of eyes in all different parts of the country. And I think that is what enables them to put together a bid that can kind of help each other. And I don't know that that would necessarily be the case everywhere. I think it has to be very specific circumstances for that to work well, which it did in this instance.
It's also quite a change to have a media or publishing houses front and center. I mean, my understanding would clearly be that TV2 will be picking up the bulk of the check and showing the bulk of the, the big games in the men's elite series. But nonetheless, to me, publishing houses, newspapers were always a kind of last resort for rights holders. Maybe not so much maybe a domestic product, but if you were looking to find Serie A or LaLiga broadcaster in Norway or one of the Nordic countries, then it would end up maybe on VG or something on their website. But now becoming more of a destination, more of a week-to-week destination for sports content is a bit of a pivot, but you see that very much as a kind of partnership with the main rights holder.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say that actually, because Media, I believe in the cycle before the current one, they had the top Syrian rights and the men's third tier. So this is not necessarily fully new territory to them. The Schibsted part of this is interesting because, as you mentioned, they just acquired TV4, the commercial broadcaster in Sweden. And I think that part of it actually is maybe more interesting than Media because now they're in this period where they're kind of trying to figure out where they stand in sport, what they can take or learn from TV4 in Sweden, who are a big sports broadcaster, have a lot of sports properties, including domestic ones. And I think now they're kind of reassessing what kind of rights they'll go for, maybe bigger rights. Will they launch a new platform? And actually, so as part of this deal, they haven't fully decided on within the broadcasters themselves which platforms their inventory is going to be showed on, because there are still 3 more years until the new deal kicks in. And that gives them plenty of time to say I'm just speculating, if they wanted to launch a new streaming platform, they can do that and then exploit their rights on there. So there's still a lot up in the air and kind of a lot left to be decided, especially in terms of those publishing houses and how they enter and change the way that they act and how they exploit their rights in the sports market.
Just broadening out a bit sort of for lessons for other European leagues of a similar size or rights holders. I mean, a lot of this, I suppose, is market specific and the dynamics affecting the Norwegian market. If I look at middling European leagues, really, over and above any negotiations they're doing on the rights, for me, there's 2 main themes at the moment. One, to a lesser extent, is production. And we don't really have time to go down into all those details, but a lot of them are looking at buying equity. The Danish league has created a JV for host broadcast, and the Austrian league has bought equity in the host broadcaster, all to try and create more control over the product. Scottish SPFL is kind of having the same thoughts at the moment as to how much control and how much they spend on the product to get it back in rights fees. That's one area, but the bigger one, I suppose, is, and the one everyone talks about, is OTT. Now, we hadn't heard any noises about a domestic OTT channel as a viable alternative for Elite Syrian and the other properties. And you can be sure of one thing, if it is a viable alternative, they will talk about it to make it a bargaining chip. But there is a very entertaining story around their international OTT, which, I mean, it's really a tale of how to get things wrong in 2026. Elite Syrian OTT was launched as an international proposition. It was in March, I think, with the streaming technology from Stay Live, which is owned by Two Circles. So it's not just Two Circles technology now, I think. So they launched it at $8.99 a month. And fans, as you can imagine, started using VPNs and bragging about it on social media that they could totally undercut TV2, whose package is 469 krona or 43 euros a month, for a wider package that also includes premium sport, Premier League, but also entertainment. But nevertheless, it was a massive workaround, and it didn't stay up for long, that was for sure. It was taken down. It has now been restored just last week at a price point of 36 euros a month, which is astonishingly high, which kind of defeats the purpose maybe of trying to get international traction, but yet you've got to make sure your front door's locked. So yeah, curious as to your guys' response to that, but also, yeah, I mean, a domestic OTT never seemed like an option here, and maybe for the best, actually.
Are you saying you wouldn't pay 36 euros to watch Norwegian football?
I might do if I had a lot of money on it. If I had a lot of money riding on it, I would, but no, afraid
Shame.
not. As much as I love Bruna FK, and we've spoken about the Man of the Match Awards, and Bodo Glimt, it's just, I mean, that's just... Although they're offering a discount, you're getting a 50% discount if you were smart enough to have signed up to the $8.99 a month. You're getting a 50% discount for 8 months. But yeah, not the way to do it. I think we've probably would come to the conclusion that the way that they've done the negotiations was far smarter domestically than anything that's been done internationally.
Yeah, I think more so than the OTT factor in this particular situation, I think it was the timing aspect of it. I think even if they had floated OTT as an idea and kind of, used it as a bargaining chip, it wouldn't have done as much as just the pure timing of club competitions for UEFA and English Premier League, because those are the crown jewels in the Nordics. Really, those are like the biggest properties that they have that are international. And, I've heard that the English Premier League is really the biggest competitor domestically for the Elite Syrian. And so they really took a massive gamble, really, is what this is. and it paid off for them. But I don't think we can say it'll necessarily pay off everywhere. And I think it's the same with OTT. That's also a gamble. And we've seen that pay off in places and very famously not pay off in others. And so I think it's one of those situations where a lot of it is just risk.
Yeah. And perversely for a league previously sponsored by a sort of betting operator, they've taken the less risky path. And also, if you're, and we've seen this across Europe, I mean, it's happened with Austria. If you're Strømsgodset or Viking Stavanger or Tromsø, you can bet your bottom krona that you would want guaranteed rights revenue over a projection of how much you might get from OTT. So we've possibly seen that borne out again. Not to say that there's not potential there, but I don't think there's a case for it having been done right yet, the OTT model. Great. Thank you, Maria. That was massively enlightening. And we will be back after a very, very short break to go into the slightly less serious stuff and look ahead to what's coming up.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
John, we're going to delve into the sporting calendar now. I believe you wanted to flag an event taking place this weekend.
Red flag, yeah. Yeah, well, we have had a bit of an F1 hiatus, haven't we? Enforced with some cancellations. It returns this weekend with Miami Grand Prix, which is the first one in the US under the new Apple deal. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of numbers they're getting for that. It's actually one of the, I think, 5 that they're going to show in big IMAX cinemas across the US, which will be interesting. Actually, last year's event race in Miami the numbers were quite down. ESPN got 2.17 million viewers on ABC, which was down pretty 30%, I think, on the year before. It's actually one of the only, it was a record year for ESPN F1 coverage, fittingly, in their last year. But the Miami Grand Prix was one of 3 where the ratings were down. So I don't know if we'll ever get numbers from Apple about their sports rights, but it'd be interesting to see if anything comes out of how they get on with this Grand Prix. So I will probably watch some of it in the UK, not live, because it goes on for too long for my interest. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if anything comes out of how the coverage goes down in the US.
Do you, I mean, as much as I bang on about linear TV viewing and sitting in a number of hours of golf I can consume, I just can't consume a whole F1 race. I can watch a Brundle pit walk and a start, and then that's it, because I don't have a dog in the race. That's my problem.
No, I'm the same. I could watch 8 hours of Test cricket for 5 days in a row, but an hour and a half of Formula One just doesn't work for me. But I said before, my oldest son, he's 9, he's quite into it now because he's got all the Legos of the teams and stuff. So he kind of, he watches like the YouTube kind of highlights and stuff. He's never going to sit down and watch a whole race, but that kind of element has certainly worked its magic on the younger audience, I think.
Have you got Duplo for the younger son?
No, he's too aggressive for Duplo.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't know if you saw this clip. It was one of those ones when everybody's like, oh, that's disgraceful. But yeah, it's one of those ones, nobody wants to see this football clip, and when everybody wants to see it. Real Zaragoza against Huesca in the LaLiga high promotion, isn't it? The Segunda.
Yeah, Segunda, yeah.
Oh, it's worth a look if you haven't seen it. He gets, have you seen it?
It's pay-per-view, isn't it, stuff?
It's he gets a second booking, I think, for shoving a Huesca player in the chest. Second booking. And once he gets his second booking, he just decides to go off and lamp Jorge Pulido, the Huesca captain, and really goes for it. I mean, he's got his glove on, but a real right hook. It took me back to the 80s. I loved it. Not that we would endorse such things, but we might. It was stunning, and it did actually make me think of a serious rights inventory point. Possibly the only person who's thinking about rights inventory when they saw that. But La Liga's now separated it out. If you're a current La Liga broadcaster of the top La Liga, you would get that as part of your package, or you can bid for that as part of your package. But the tenders they're now sending out, and the most recent one they sent out in Croatia, Slovenia, Cyprus, and Greece, which went out recently. You've only got 7 days left to bid if you want to bid, so get a move on. For the first time I can remember, in the last couple of tenders, they've not included the second division. So they have a separate process. So it's leaving all the broadcasters are asking for clarification on that and saying, well, look, hang on a minute, do we get Segunda as well? Not quite clear yet how you would get Segunda. I'm sure you can if you want it. But if you want to see a dust up in the Segunda, then it will no longer be part of your rights package, is what we've learned this week. And we've also learned, and I meant to mention this last week when we were talking about Maverick McNeely, when we were talking about golf. There are a couple of golfers in Thailand who have wonderful names. One of them's Pongsapak Laopakdi, which feels run-of-the-mill Thai to me, but his first name is FIFA.
Oh,
His
good lad.
dad was asked why he called him FIFA. Now, he was born in 2005. So, bit of context. This is pre-Zurich raids. This is pre-finding out Chuck Blazer's cats had a penthouse and pre the Gianni era. He said he was sort of deciding between FIFA and UEFA as his rights holder, and he went for FIFA.
Okay.
The reason it's shot to fame is that he won the Asian Amateur Championship, I think. So he played in the Masters. He will play in the Open Championship this year. So if you see FIFA coming up on screen, I don't think it was the video game. Don't think so. It is a trend in Thailand to have a kind of nickname as a first name. There is also a golfer called Top Gun Nat Hapitar, which is pretty exciting. And there's a 1FC fighter who's also got the first name Top Gun. I'm not going to butcher his surname. But they also have it as Top Gun with a capital T and a capital G. They don't have the trademark. But I think we should all go off and get monikers, new monikers. I don't think SPFL Martin Ross is going to kick off, but UIPM Jonathan Rest?
Yeah, I could go with that. Yeah, I think as long as Shiny Fang doesn't mind me stealing UIPM.
Or maybe WTF Jonathan Rest. Or maybe go with that and revive,
That would work.
Revive Taekwondo's old name.
Okay, Martin, I think time has probably beaten us. We started off in Germany. We ended up in Thailand with some golfers. For all the stories that we've discussed today, we will put links in the podcast description. As always, for the most accurate collection of feeds across media and sponsorship, head to sportbusiness.com, and we will be back with another episode next week.